Hi YouTube, welcome back to Wtf Rc Cars. So, today we've got the new Flysky transmitter, the one that's going to replace the GT5. This is the FS-G7P. It uses the ANT protocol, so none of the previous receivers from either the MB4, the Pro or the GT5 will work with this. However, all the sensors that currently work with the Noble Pro and MB4 will be fully supported, including the 4-channel add-on that goes into S.BUS. So that might be useful for some of you. But this is an incredibly interesting transmitter. So let's read you a few specs. So it is the FS-G7P, uses 2.4 GHz, uses ANT protocol, weighs 305 grams, full C and FCC licensed. It's a 7-channel for car or boat. Uses 4 1.5 volt AA batteries or a 2S LiPo on the little red JST connector. And let's have a look what we get in box. So this is, to what I believe, the full retail version, so it's exactly what you will get. So we get one little white box, the transmitter itself, and some basic instructions. You can download the full instruction manual from Flysky. So let's get rid of that. So we get the actual controller itself. It's quite a nice feeling controller really. You've got your normal throttle, brake, steering. You have one button. So that's a button that will lock on or lock off. You get a variable dial with a center position notch, so you know when it's centered. You get a top hat, which is currently set to trim, I believe, when you first open it. So you've got forward and backwards, left and right. It does also push in, but we'll have to see if that's actually a button or if it's just because it's pushing all 4 of the directions down. Then you've got your controller that lets you navigate the menus, so left, right, up, down, and then press to enter. Then if we move to this side, you've got one button on the actual handle itself. Then you've got a 2-way dial, so a 2-way button, and then a 3-way switch. So center, left and right, and then you have another variable dial, and again we've got a nice center notch so you can tell when you're centered. So quite a fully functioning controller for the money. Now underneath, that's where we've got as AA battery holder, and you've also got the JST plug, so literally any LiPo that can fit in there that's 2S can plug directly in. Battery life, Flysky are claiming from 1300 milliamp hour rechargeable NIM AA's up to 10 hours just off one set. And bearing in mind 1300 milliamp hour for AA NIMs is quite low. I've got some that run up to 2800. So on a set of NIM rechargeables, you're looking literally hours and hours of runtime. So that's the quick covering of what you get with the controller. It has got a USB-C connector, which is used for firmware updates. It's also used for letting you control simulators on PC. So that might be quite interesting. Nice to see that included on sort of one of the lower price ranged controllers. You do have the carbon fiber effect etched into plastic on quite a lot of it. And just remove that. And we've got a nice size screen. So I believe this is monochrome dot matrix. But let's have a look what else we get in box. So this is the included receiver, and this is the FS-Rc7P, and this one, by the looks of it, we've got 7 channels. So on the bottom you've got 1 to 5. Then you've got a bind plug and VCC or power in, and it's also the connection that your DVB voltage. So this is what you can use to monitor external lipos, much the same as we do on the Noble Pro and MB4. You've then on the front of it we have, so you've got channel 6, channel 7, then you've got a sensor input for the temp sensors, RPM sensors, voltage sensors. So much same as the MB4 and the Pro. You can link up to 15 of these, I believe. It's either 12 or 15, not sure. They daisy chain into each other, but you're not ever going to hit that limit. It just seems a crazy high limit that Flysky thought, well, we can do it, so why not? And then the top one on this side is the one for, it says Servo, but it's basically the one that you'd use for S.BUS. So if you've got the extra 4-channel breakout or anything like that, you can plug it into that one. It does also have a bind button. So we've got a little bind button on that, same as the FGR 4, 8 and 12B receivers for the Pro and the MB4. The range on these is up to 300 meters, so with no interference or anything, you're going to get around 300 meters out of them, and you do get a nice size antenna on this one. So paperwork wise, we've got a quick start guide, and that just tells you how to put batteries in, how to switch it on, and a few other little bits. And then we do have the full instructions for the actual receiver itself, and that tells you your pin out, how to use your DVB, how to put them into binding, how to update them. So that's quite useful. But what we've also got, we have this receiver, which is a really interesting receiver. So this is the HW711. It's classified as waterproof, 2 to 3S LiPo, 5 to 9 cell NIM batteries. BEC output is 6 volt 3 amp, so quite a reasonable BEC on it. Now the interesting thing with this one, as you can see from the connectors it comes with, this is not just a receiver, this is a ESC and receiver all in one. So it's for brushed motors, so quite an interesting one. And as I get further into the explanation of this, you see why I'll say this is an interesting one, maybe for rock crawlers. So you've got a 40 amp ESC and 200 amp max, but as you can see on the top here, we've obviously got channel 1, 3 and 4, because channel 2 runs the internal ESC. But then you have a whole bunch of other connectors, and these are dual pin connectors, and these are actually light outputs. So you've got a receiver, you've got a speed controller, and a full light controller, all built into one unit. You basically, the lights are broken up into multiple sets, but you've got top light, flash, tail light, head, CLR, CLL, so turn signals left and right, and you can configure how these work, but that's going to need a full video to explain it, because it's all to do with where you have channel 3 switched on the controller, and you program it by turning the wheel to one extreme, then power it up, and it'll cycle through modes of what these light controls do. Sounds more complicated than it is, but quite an impressive little controller, receiver with ESC built in and light controller. The switch is removable, so you can mount it remotely, and it's got a little waterproof covering on it. But yeah, quite an interesting one, that one. Next up we have a smaller ESC and receiver all in one, and I believe this is for 280 to 370 can size motors and above 12 turn. And this one is much smaller, so it's designed for the much smaller RCs. I think 1/16, 1/18 scale. You do have a nice antenna, comes with plugs on it for the battery and output to the motor, but you can cut them off, put whatever you want on. And it does have an output for the steering servo. So this one will only accept 2S LiPo or 5 to 7 cell NIM. It is rated as waterproof, and the BEC is 6 volt 1 amp. So still not a bad BEC output, but definitely something that might come in useful for the smaller rock crawlers. Next up, we have this tiny little thing, and this is a 4-channel. So you've got channels 1 to 4, and quite an interesting thing with this one and these two, and I believe most of the other ones, there's only this one that actually has a bind button. So the way all these work is every time you turn the RC on, if you turn the RC on before the transmitter, after a short amount of time, these will go into auto bind mode. So the procedure for running this is same as the Traxxas, always turn your transmitter on first. But basically, to bind it to these, you turn the radio on, put it in bind mode, and then you turn the RC on and it'll auto bind. So quite interesting. And then after that, you always turn the controller on first. When you turn the RC on, the receiver automatically looks for its bound controller and doesn't go into bind mode. But yeah, quite interesting. This one is the FS-R4P, and this is 3.5 to 8.4 volt. So although it's a tiny little receiver, may be good for sort of race RCs or something where you're concerned about keeping the weight down and you're stuck for space. Then, moving on, we have the FS-R4B. So again, another tiny little receiver, 3.5 to 8.4 volt. This one is 4-channel, and this I would say would be a cracking little receiver for the smaller RCs, or if you're looking for like the Tamiya cars. Does have a big antenna on it, which is quite nice, and it is just 4-channel. But again, auto binds this one, and the waterproof rating on this one is PPX4, so I think it's more splash proof, but quite a nice tiny little receiver. We have this little tiny micro receiver that's basically just a circuit board with a tiny antenna. Now this one is quite interesting. It'll run 3.5 to 8.4 volt. You've got channels 1 to 4, but then you've also got a light controller built in. So maybe for the likes of the SCX24s, tiny rock crawlers, this would come in really handy, or some of the smaller scale RCs, or just something where you're really concerned about weight, because some of these receivers will be absolutely fantastic for the smaller RCs when you're struggling for space. This one's rated IPX4, and again this one I believe is auto bind, so as soon as you turn it on it'll look to bind to a transmitter. But that covers the receivers that are available at the minute. Really interesting to see that we've got receivers with built-in ESCs and light controllers, and even tiny receivers with light controllers built in. But let's get you in for a closer shot so you can see the actual menu itself and see what sort of settings we've got and options we've got on this controller. Right, so one quite interesting thing I've found with it, if you've got a power bank and a USB-C cable, you don't actually have to put batteries in. You can power the transmitter directly from USB-C. It's probably because of the functionality where it will work as a simulator controller on a PC, but it doesn't, to what I've seen, charge the batteries in any way. So basically we have button on top, variable dial, a top hat 4-way to adjust the trim, So if you press and hold it, you'll see the trim starts to move for steering. Does the same for throttle. So when we move the steering and throttle, we get the gauge readout. You got your model memory at top of the screen. You got your steering dual rate and throttle, and your brake. So on-off switch is on the back. That will only function when you're running from the actual batteries in the base. We've got a little clip on the bottom so you can put lanyard on it, and there's a tiny scroll in the front so you can mount a phone holder to it if you like. So this button moves up, down, left, right. So I believe to get into menu you just press it. That will take us into his main menu. If you then press into it, you've got your reverse for each servo, each channel, and then press backwards to come out of it. I think you press up and down to select the ones you want, and then back to come out of it. The next menu we've got is Endpoints. So you go into that, and as you press down, you can jump to the high and low or left and right depending on which you're on. And then to adjust it, you just go into it, use your up and down to set what value you want, and then back to come out. And that's the same. You can work your way through all the channels. So it'll go down to 5, 6, and then 7, and then scroll back up. Again, press left to come out of it. Your next one is the sub trim. So you can go into this one, set all your sub trims, and you do this exactly the same way. You just pick the one you want, go into it, and then press up and down to set your value. And it's always up and down to set your value, and then left again to come back out of it. Next menu down, we've got dual rates. So this is where you can change your dual rate, but not only change it, so you can set your dual rate, but then you can also decide whether it's on or off. Now, this is one way you can turn it on and off. The other way you can turn it on and off is to set your dual rate and then set one of the function buttons to turn that setting on and off when you want. Next one down, we've got throttle curve and steering curve and brake curve. And these, just same as any other menus, press it to go into it. You can set whatever curve you want. Once you've set the curve, you can set whether it's active or not. And again, both the setting of it and whether it's active or not can be assigned to one of the buttons on the controller, so you don't have to come into menu to do it every time. SVC will only be active if you have a receiver bound to it with stability control, and that will have the settings for the stability control on that receiver. If you try and go into it without a receiver connected that supports it, it'll tell you not supported. And then we have beginner mode, and you can turn beginner mode on and off, and that just restricts the amount of options you've got and what you can do. So if we work our way down menus, this one is where you assign what each channel does. So if we go into channel 3, you can set it to be either controlled via a knob, which it means the variable ones. So that will give you the functionality. So if we set it to null, that'll be nothing on channel 3. Trim, it will give you a list of trim settings that you can assign to channel 3. So if we come back out and then go to the control options, then you've got a list of just the trim functionality buttons, and then you can set the number of steps it goes in. So like on the MB4 and the Pro, you could have it going 2, 3, 4 or however many jumps per time you press the button. Then you can set it to switch. So if you set it to switch, then you've got SW3, which is the various buttons and dials on the controller, and you can also, if it's a reversible channel or a reversible button, you've got the option to do that too. So if you set it to switch 1, I'm not sure which is switch 1, yeah, the top one. So there's no point having a reverse on that because it's either on or off. Set it to TRZ, so that'd be one of the functions of the trim button, but then you'd lose trim as an option. So switch 3, I think that's the 3 position one. Yep. Switch 2, so I think that's the one on the actual handle itself. So it's a press on, press off. Switch 1, I believe that's back to top. So you can set whatever you want the functionality and the control of channel 3 to be. And it's nice that you've got the option of setting these exactly how you want them, rather than some controls you would literally just have the rocker switch on the handle and that would be channel 3. There's nothing you can do about it. Some you can reverse it, but that's about your lot. So it's nice on this that we've got all 7 channels fully assignable, or the extra channels 3 to 7 fully assignable. So mixing menu, we have steering mixing. So if we go into that, so you can set the channel that controls it. So this is the channel that the mixing output is going to be sent on. So you've got that as an option. Then you've got the actual different modes, so it can be set for 4-wheel steer. Very interesting one, can be set to track. So if you've got a tracked vehicle, when you do your steering, it's already set to the mix to do your actual tractor treads. So it'll allow a tank to be controlled, or a excavator that's got tracked treads on it instead of wheels. So that's quite nice. Or you can turn it fully off. I believe when you go into steering mode, you can then set front steer. So that's front and rear opposite direction, front and rear same direction, and then just rear steer as a mixer. So there's a lot of options you can do, and you can set the fact that you can change this to a button as well, so you're not having to come into this menu if it's an option that you would be wanting to change quite a lot. So let's make sure I've got that turned off. Else that's going to start confusing us when we start trying to bind stuff. Then you've got all the manual mixers. So in here, turn it on and off. Then you've got the direction, you've got what slave channel it is, you've got the percentage of offset, the high and low position. So it's very, very configurable. And that's the same for all the rest of the mixers. Then we've got an interesting one on the timer. So we can have it as an up timer, you can set an alarm, but there's also throttle. So if we turn this on and then hit the throttle, the timer will automatically start, which I'm sure that that's been asked for on both the MB4 and the Pro, and I've yet to see that as an option to auto start the timer. And you can set alarms on it, as I say. You can have it as an up timer, down timer, lap timer. So we've got the timer turned off. Let's have a quick look at the alarm settings for it. So you've got the option to turn it on off. And then you've got the option to set the actual alarm time. So it looks like you can go all the way up to 99 minutes. Turn that off because we don't want alarms going off when we don't want them. And then you've got your list of laps, and it gives you your overall and average, and then up to, well, it says up to 21, so it's quite interesting. Next menu, switch assignments. So this is basically split into 3 categories. So you've got knob, switch and trim. So your trim is what does this top hat, and it lets you set the step and what you want the functionality to be, and it also does TR1, which if we go into it, TR1's currently turned off. I'm not sure which button. It's the 2-position switch. So where it says fun is just functionality, so you can go into it and you can set which functionality you want that button to have if you don't want it to have a channel to control. So as I said, this is where you can change, you can have your mixers and everything set to buttons, or you can move your trim to it. You can turn your throttle rate, steering rate, so you can set all them, steering curve, throttle curve, 4-wheel steer rate. So any of these settings can be set to one of the buttons, and you can reverse it and change the step. If we look up at these two, these are set for left and right for steering, front and back for throttle, but you can change them to whatever you like. Then you can go to your switches. TRZ, to what I can work out, is what you get when you turn the trim functionality off from this button. So you can set that as well, but then you've got switch 1, switch 2, switch 3, all scattered around the controller, and you can go into them, and depending on which one it is and what functionality it has, it lets you choose what option you're going to set on it. So you see some have different functions that you can choose from. And I think it basically depends on whether it's a variable or a multi-position or just a button as to what functionality you can have on it. But you can do like the reset of the timer start, everything like that. And then that's where you've got your VR1 and VR2. And again, you can choose not to have it assigned to a channel but a function instead. And same for VR2. So you can set quite a lot of the functionality to various dials and buttons depending on how you want the controller set up. So if we look at RX, basically this is where you set your failsafe. You need to have a receiver connected to set it all up properly, but you've basically got options of what you want things set at, or you can just have it so the failsafe's not set, or you can have failsafe turned off. Now, once you get an RC set up on it, I would set the failsafes because you really don't want to run away. The bind page, this is where we set up how we want the controller to actually bind. So your options are 2-way or 1-way on the actual transmission mode. Then we've got standard. So this is where you switch it to a ESC receiver, which would be this one or this one currently. Not sure if you can see them. Or you have it as a standard one. The output for the PWM and I.BUS controls. So if you were using it as a sensor and not the 4-channel breakout, you'd set it to S.BUS, I believe. But we'll have to look into that when we set them up. And I know I.BUS is for the 4-channel breakout. So something very similar to the MB4 and the Noble Pro. So you can set your servo frequency, analog digital, or you can actually go in and set it to whatever you want. Let's see what it'll go up to. Now most servos and ESCs are quite happy in the 300, lower 300 range. I know a lot set to 333. So the maximum you're going to be able to go up to is 400, which that's usually the digital servos, usually between 300 and 400. If you do get any weird issue where your ESC won't calibrate or anything, literally come into this menu and drop that down to about 300, 333. I have seen some Traxxas ESCs refuse to function if it's above around 280, 285. And then you've got your bind to start the binding process. So, range test. Basically, this is just a good way to see if you think you've got a range issue. So, SW2 is on the transmitter handle. So, if you press it, it goes to DC, or basically just means it's been lowered. And then you'll see your signal. So you can press and hold the button, it'll drastically reduce transmission power. And if you've got your receiver pretty close to you and you see it dropping off altogether, then it's a pretty good indication you've got some kind of fault with the receiver antenna or something along them lines. But it will give you signal strength and the noise. Your sensor panel. So this one, as you have a receiver connected with more sensors, you'll get more options. But basically, we can turn this on off. You've got an alarm type. So if we turn it on, then you've got an alarm type to warn you when voltage is high. And then you've got the actual alarm voltage. See if I can get this up and down. So you can set your voltage to whatever battery or LiPo you're running. You can set it as a high alarm or a low alarm. So basically it'll go off and warn you. So all you have to do with this is work out what actual voltage your batteries are running at and then where you want the alarm to set. But I'm going to turn that off because I don't know what voltage it's running through the USB-C at the minute. But once you get more, it's obviously saying alarm's going off because there's no batteries in it, so it's getting no voltage whatsoever. But as you get more sensors, like your temp sensor and everything, you'll get more options. So it'd be interesting to see how it actually works with all them. ESC setup is for receivers with built-in ESC. So it'd be interesting to go through, we'll get one of them bound and see what settings we do have. Your I.BUS setup, basically you can control what the I.BUS is doing. So not an option that I think a lot of people use, but it's nice to have. Then we've got the model select, so you can name it. You can change to it. So we can change to model, we can change name. We can copy a model or we can reset the model memory. And then into system menu. So we've got English and Chinese, idle alarm, so it'll warn you you've left it on. Battery selection, so it knows what battery it's running off, so AA or 2S LiPo. LCD contrast, so if we keep pressing it, you can change the contrast of the actual screen just to get it how you want it. LED, you can turn this LED so it's on or off. And then sounds, you can either have system and alarm, so buttons and alarms, just system, or off altogether. Volume is currently set to 60%, so you can set that to whatever you like. Calibration, you go into it, you do steering full, throttle and brake, and then VR2 I believe is on the side. Yep. So you do that both ways, and then press it again, left, and it says it's happy. Firmware update mode, that's where you go in to update the software on computer. Factory, we'll do a factory reset. Help, you can get a link to manual, so QR code, and then it'll tell you you can go to a website. And then about, it will tell you the controller type basically, so the model number, firmware version, I think that's the production time or date, hardware revision, and the RF software version. And then we're back to all endpoints and the original setups. So, quite an interesting controller. I will be doing lots of the other videos on how we bind to particular control receivers and the full setup procedure and everything. So let's wrap this one up. Right, so in case any of you is interested, that is basically how I've been powering it to show you how it's set up. So no batteries in base and just powered off at USB-C. Quite nice for the way I do things, and also quite useful for when you plug it into PC, so you're not having to keep an eye on batteries or out like that. You can take them out, use it as a PC controller. So this video's already been long enough, and every one of these receivers is slightly different, especially the ones with light controllers built in and DVB built in and S.BUS. So we're going to have to do videos on each individual one of these, and I'll show you how to bind it and set it all up and everything and create a model memory. But thanks again for watching Wtf Rc Cars. If you like this kind of content and want to know more about this controller, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share to friends and family if you know anybody that might be interested in this, or just want to be bored senseless listening to my incessant ramblings. And I'll catch you guys again in the next one.